This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Warlord of Kor by Terry Carr. Chapter 5. They had some trouble getting cooperation from Horn on any further mine probing. The Herligy lived among some of the ruins out on the flat, where the winds threw dust and sand against the weathered stone walls, leaving them worn, smooth, and rounded. The aliens kept these buildings in some state of repair, and there was a communal garden of the planet's dark, fungoid plant life. As Ryanson and Mara strode between the massive buildings, they passed several of the huge creatures. One or two of them turned and regarded the couple with dull eyes, and went on slowly through the grey shadows. They found Horn sitting motionlessly at the edge of the cluster of buildings, gazing out over the flat toward the low hills which stood black against the deep blue of the horizon sky. Ryanson lowered the telepather from his shoulder and approached him. The alien made no motion of protest when Ryanson hooked up the interpreter, but when the Earthman raised the mic to speak, Horn's dry voice spoke in the silence of the thin air, and the machine's stylus traced out, "There is no purpose." Ryanson paused for a moment, then said, "We're almost finished with our reports. We should finish today." "There is no purpose, meaning quest." "No purpose to the report?" Ryanson said after a moment. "It's important to us, and we're almost finished. There would be even less purpose in stopping now, when so much has been done." Horn's large, leathery head turned towards him, and Ryanson felt the ancient creature's heavy gaze on him like a shadow. "We are accustomed to that." "We don't think alike," Ryanson said to him. "To me there is a purpose. Will you help me once more?" There was no answer from the alien, only a slow nodding of his head to one side, which Ryanson took for assent. He motioned Mara to set up the telepather. After their last experience, Ryanson could understand the creature's reluctance to continue. Perhaps even his statements that there was no purpose to the Earthman's researches made sense, for could the codification of the history of a dying race mean much to its last members? Probably they didn't care. They walked slowly through the ruins of their world and felt all around them fading, and the jumbled past in their minds must be only one more thing that was to disappear. And Ryanson had not forgotten the terrified waves of hatred which had blasted at him from Horn's mind, nor had Horn, he was sure. Mara connected the leads of the telepather, while the alien sat motionlessly, his dark eyes only occasionally watching either of them. When she was finished, Ryanson nodded for her to activate the linkage. Then there was a rush of Horn's mind upon his, the dim thought streams growing closer, the greyed images becoming sharper and washing over him, and in a moment he felt his own thoughts merge with them, felt the totality of his own consciousness blend with that of Horn. They were together. They were almost one mind. In Horn he heard the whisper of distrust, of fear, and the echoes of that hatred which had struck at him once before. But they were in the background. All around him here on the surface was a pervading feeling of uselessness, resignation, almost of unreality. The calm which he had noted before in Horn had been shaken and turned, and in its place was this fog of hopelessness. Tentatively, Ryanson reached for the racial memories in that grey mind, feeling Horn's own consciousness heavy beside him. He found them, layers of thoughts of unknown aliens still alive here, the pictures and sounds of thousands of years past. He probed among them, looking again for the memories of Tebron, and found what he was searching for. He was Tebron, marching across the vast flat which he had seen before, the winds alive around him among the shuffling feet of his army. He felt the muscles of his massive legs tight with weariness, and tasted the dryness of the air as he drew in long gasps. He was still hours from the city, but they would rest before dawn. Rianson turned among these memories, moving forward in them, and was aware of Horn watching him. There was still the wariness in his mind, and a stir of anxiety, but it was blanketed by the tired hopelessness he had seen. He reached further in the memories, and... The temple guard fell in the shadows, and one of his own warriors stepped forward to retrieve his weapons. The remains of the guard's body rolled down 3, 4, 5 of the steps of the temple and stopped. His eyes lingered on that body for only a moment, and then he turned and went up to the entrance. There was a moaning of pain or of fright rising somewhere in his head. He was only partly aware of it. He walked into the shadows of the doorway and paused, but only for a moment. There was no movement inside, and he stepped forward, down one step into the interior. Screams echoed through the halls and corridors of the temple, high and piercing, growing in volume as they echoed, buffeting him almost into unconsciousness. He knew they were from Horn, but he fought them, watching his own steps across the dark inner room. He was Tebron Marl, king, priest, ruler of all Herlage in the Temple of Kor, and he could feel the stone solid beneath his feet. Sweat broke out on his back. His own, or Tebron's. But he was Tebron, and he fought the blast of fear in his mind as though it were a battle for his very identity. He was Tebron. The screaming faded, and he stood in silence before the altar of Kor. So this is the source, he thought. For how many days had he fought toward this? It was useless to remember. The muscles of his body were remembrance enough, and the scar tissue that hindered the movement of one shoulder. If he remembered those battles, he would again hear the fading echoes of enemy minds dying within his, and he had had enough of that. This was the goal, and it was his. Perhaps there need be no more such killing. He opened his mouth and spoke the words which he had learned so many times before, during his apprenticeship in the region of the mines. The rituals of the temple were always conducted in the ancient spoken language. Kor demanded it, and only the priest caste knew these words, for they were so old that their form had changed almost completely, even by the time his people had developed telepathy and discarded speech. They were not communicated to the rest of the people. I am Tebron Marl, king, priest, leader of all Herlage. I await your orders' guidance. He knelt according to the ritual and gazed up at the altar. The eye of Kor blinked there, a small circle of light in the dark room. The altar was simple but massive. Its heavy columns, built upon the traditional lines, supported the weight of the eye. He watched its slow waxing and waning and waited. Within him, Rianson's mind stirred, and Kor spoke. Remain motionless. Do not go forward. He felt a child as a wave of sensitivity spread through all his skin, and his organs sped for a moment. Then it was true. In the Temple of Kor, the god leader really did speak. I await further words. The eye held his gaze almost hypnotically in the dimness. The voice sounded in the huge arched room. The sciences quests of your race lead you to extinction. The knowledge words offered to me by your priests make it clear that within 100 years your race will leave its planet. You must not go forward, for that way lies the extermination of all your race. His mind swam. This was not what he had expected. The god leader Kor had always aided his people in their sciences. In the knowledge word offerings they reported to the eye the results of their studies, and often, if asked properly, the god leader would clarify uncertainties which they faced. But now he ordered an ending to research quests. This was